Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where today we are making this pair of moccasins from brain tan buckskin. Now, there's basically three different construction methods for moccasins. You have the two pucker toe versions, which are the East Coast version. In the Southeast, it's mostly a center seam pucker toe, where the seam comes right up the middle of the toe and you don't have a vamp. Okay? And then in the Northeast, this two-piece pucker toe design dominates, where you do have a vamp and the toe puckers up to that vamp. And the difference in those is skis and snowshoes. Right? So in the Southern Appalachians and the rest of the Southeast, you tend to have the center seam because it's a simple one-piece pattern. You don't have an extra thing to deal with. But if you ever put that type of shoe into a harness for a snowshoe or a ski, it's going to wear a blister right down the middle of your foot, right? So in the Northeast and the far north, you tend to have this sort of pucker toe with a vamp design. And then the third design is side seam, where you have a flat sole and then the top of the shoe comes down to meet the flat sole. And that's done in, mostly west of the Mississippi. That's the dominant shoe type. And usually the sole is rawhide instead of a brain tan. Okay, the uppers are brain tan and the sole is rawhide. The reason is that rawhide is a more durable sole than a brain tan leather, as long as it never gets wet. So in desert and dry, arid regions, you tend to have the rawhide sole being used in the side seam. And in the east, the more wet regions, you tend to have the everything being leather, and fully tan leather, and one of the pucker toe designs. Now in the far north, you also have a pucker toe with a rawhide base, and that's the winter muckluck style. So the winter mucklucks in the far north will take seal rawhide and wet it, and then wet form it into this sort of pucker toe for the base of the boot, and then tanned uppers for the top of the boot. But obviously this is a high top type boot, right? So then the high top is a tanned leather, usually fur on, and the vamp is going to be tanned leather, sometimes fur on, sometimes not. So you have the pucker toe with vamp design in general construction, but with a rawhide bottom. And that works in the far north because it stays frozen. Okay? And if it stays frozen, it's not getting wet. You don't get rawhide wet. But exposure to a couple of frozen ice crystals doesn't get rawhide wet, so it works up there. Okay? But here in the humid east, where we can't really use rawhide for a shoe, you get one of these two pucker toes. Now, we have a whole playlist on how to make your own brain tan, but you could also substitute any kind of like washable suede will work for this as well. If you want to go and buy leather to make this, get one of those washable suedes. Everything that I'm doing with this, you'll be able to do with that. It's going to be a whole lot less expensive than trying to buy genuine brain tan. Genuine brain tan is like $300 to $600 per hide, if you can find it. If you're buying something, just buy a washable suede and you'll be fine. You can make this shoe just exactly like we did. If you want to tan your own, there's a whole playlist on that, and there's also a lot of resources on our Patreon, including compilations on various hide working techniques. And later this evening, I need to go and continue to work on another one of those to get up. So that it is a building repository. But this video just deals with the making of the shoe. The first step is making a pattern, and you're going to make this pattern from your own foot. You start with a tracing of your own foot, okay? And then we will develop this pattern just based on body measurements. So if you want to come along and make some mocks, join in. Now, the first thing that we need to do to make our little moccasin is to make a pattern. And we want to make a pattern directly from the foot. So the first step is put your foot on a piece of paper and trace around it. And you can see here, that's original tracing, right here, that's the original tracing of the toes. But then to cut it out, you just want to kind of even that out a little bit, right? So this is original tracing going around the big toe there, and we can just kind of go out and smooth that, right? Because we don't want to try and cut and sew around individual toes. That would be a little bit silly. And when you're doing this, you can decide if you want it a little bit bigger, if you want it a little bit smaller. And since we're going to do it in buckskin, it will stretch to conform to your foot. So if you want it to fit like a glove, you actually want to make it a little bit undersized because it's going to expand a little bit just in motion. Now we cut this out, and I'm going to trace it onto a larger piece of paper, large enough to make our full pattern. And I did take this and fold it in half just to get a crease line. And I'm now lining up that crease line with the middle of this pair of pages that have been taped together. Okay. Now the front half of this is going to be our vamp. And I'm going to end up cutting right on that middle. So this is a tracing of the right foot. So I'm just going to put it right on top there. And then to make a left foot, we do that. So when this side is up, I am making the left foot. When this side is up, I'm making for the right foot. So you want to make sure when you lay it out on your leather that you make one right and one left. Okay? And if you're doing it, if you're marking this on the flesh side, then the right and left are going to be reversed. If you're marking it on the grain side, then they are what they are. But as long as you have one of each, you're fine. It's going to be fine. So we will cut that right there to make the vamp piece. Now the sides of this, since we're doing a northern style pucker toe, this is going to come, the edges are going to fold up and then fold up onto the vamp and be sewn together like so. So we need to leave a little bit extra dimension around this so that it has, we can fold that cup up. And we're just going to do a simple 2-finger measurement all the way around. Okay, now here at the heel, I'm going to make a mark 3 fingers. And then 2 fingers out, and then 1 thumb width out. Okay? So now the first thing we want to do is just kind of square this across the back. Then we're going to trace around our dotted line. Give myself one more little dot there. Again, if you want to wear it with socks, a little bit bigger. If you want to wear it barefoot into the shoe, a little bit smaller. But there's our general outline of the piece that we're going to cut out. Now, these back pieces are going to fold in and around. Okay? So we have extra material here. And we're going to cut along the back, so we need a little flap to fold up to meet it. So we're going to come kind of straight out. a little bit more than a thumb width. Kind of give me a reference for symmetry. Come out here. There's our little heel flap. And then we're going to come back to this rear line. Okay. Looks a little bit big to my eye, but we're going to have the opportunity to fold this up after we cut it out, and we can make any small adjustments that we need. Okay, so I'm going to cut around this line and then do kind of a dry fit. Let me write on this right, left. Okay, then we're going to kind of do a dry fit, and we can adjust as we need once we see how it's going to look when it's folded up. We have this all cut out, and just, again, a little bit of a dry fit. You can see how that folds up. And this little heel tab is going to come up like that. And then the sides here are going to fold up into the vamp like so. Okay? And then all this extra material in the toe gets gathered, which is why it's a pucker toe. Now, the last thing we need to do in preparing our pattern, deciding exactly how much material to leave in this heel section. So I'm going to get that so it's nice and straight. And you can see I have about an inch of overlap here. We're going to go right down the middle and cut both sides at once, so that when these fold in, they will line up perfectly. And that's going to end up getting baseball stitched. So I don't need to leave a seam allowance there. And the 2-finger width all the way around here is going to leave plenty of seam allowance around the vamp. So it will come in a little bit over it won't be a straight up. In the toe section here, it won't be straight up. It'll come in a little bit because we're leaving lots of extra material in the side. And the vamp itself is going to be a little bit narrower than the actual foot. So it'll kind of curl over the foot. The southern pucker toe, you leave even more on the side, and it all comes up into a seam right across the middle of the toe. So I'm going to get this laid out. And we want to pick a nice, thick, durable buck hide or an old doe for this project. So I'm thinking this area here looks good for cutting vamps. So again, we'll cut one. Since I'm on the back side, that'll be the left, and then when I flip it over, that'll be the right. And then the same thing here. Find a likely looking spot, that'll be a left, flip it over, that'll be a right. So I'm going to get these cut out, and I'm going to get a bunch of lacing cut out, and then we'll look at sewing the thing up. This is going to be our first pair of leathers, and this is going to be for the right foot. So the bottom is facing flesh side up, and the vamp is facing flesh side down. Okay, so all the flesh side is on the inside, and the nice smooth grain is to the outside. So we're going to set the vamp aside for the time being and start with the heel assembly of this guy. Now, I'm doing it this way because, you think about pulling this up and puckering that toe all in. This is going to get very congested. Now, the pucker is going to be sewn up above the line of the shoes. So I will always have easy finger access to make those stitches. Okay? But the heel, once all this is up and this comes in, it's going to get more congested. So I always like to think ahead at what is going to get congested and where, as I'm deciding how to put these things together. Now I've gone ahead and just marked off 5 even stitches across this join and pre-punched those holes. And they're all about the same level except for that one. And if you look here, there's a thin spot in the leather, so I move back to move away from that. Okay? You have to be conscious when you're working with these sorts of natural materials that not everything is going to be perfect all the time. So you have to just work around those things. I'm going to start stitching at the top. Actually, I'm going to put this to the outside, I think. I'm going to feed this through from both sides. We don't want large external stitches or knots, but this is going to be a very small stitch. The reason I'm starting from the top is because there's going to be a natural bar across there, and the top is where there's the most pressure trying to undo the stitches. So if I finish off at the top, there's a loose end that every footfall is going to be trying to work loose. But if I start at the top and work down to the bottom, and then finish off at the bottom, then when this flap comes up, that's going to overstitch that as well, and it will be very, very secure. Okay? Such as that. Okay? So we always want to go, since we started on the outside, we're going to keep doing this from the outside. You always want to start from the same direction. You want to go up through the middle and then down in. You can see how even with this open, it's already even a little congested. We'll get the other one. Go through the gap. And then down. And that is the baseball stitch. Now you always want to start from the same side so you have a nice even crisscross pattern. Okay? And we're just going to do that all the way down. So this seam is completely finished. You can see how that looks, and then on the inside we've just taken the tag ends and tucked them up through a couple of those loops, and that'll hold just fine. But I mean, you can see why when we're ending here at the bottom and just tucking, why I started at the top, because it has that solid crossbar and that won't work loose. Okay, now we need to work on this heel tab. I've come in already and punched a couple of holes in it. Now I need to transfer those to the other side. So I'm just going to do that with the pencil. Stick it in the hole and make a mark, and then make a couple outside marks. So I have a double row of holes. That's just going to go through the middle. That's okay. And then this is going to get a chevron stitch, which will completely trap this loose edge going around, and it looks a little bit fancy. So this is going to be a very small, awkward little piece to chevron stitch. I'm going to do this off camera. There are several tutorials of doing this stitch already on the channel. I've used it in both the men's and the women's buckskin shirt projects. So I'll make sure there's a link at the end screen to the playlist where all of that lives. So you can look at either the men's or the women's shirts and find the chevron stitch tutorials. I'm going to get this done, and then we'll look at adding in the vamp. I hope that you're enjoying this content, and if you are, I would love to invite you to join our Patreon page and the community over there. The Patreon and that funding is super important for this channel as well as most YouTube channels. It just takes resources to do these things, to buy materials, to go on trips, to go interview people, to do activities, and we're trying to build and make the channel better in all of those categories. So we're super grateful for everybody who's already there. And if you would like to come and join the ranks of those folks, we have a lot of rewards for the folks who do join on the Patreon. We have a large repository of historic information on traditional skills that have been re-indexed and edited and produced in easy-to-print formats and formats that are easy to put into a page reader. And it's indexed by skill rather than all of the random ways that it was indexed in the past, so you could access what you want. We also have a lot of plans and patterns for various projects, like this shoulder bag that we're going to replicate here soon. The fur stretchers behind me are another example, and all of that library becomes an infinite access resource to you when you join the Patreon at any of the paid tiers, even at $1 a month. If you don't want to join that way, they can be purchased as individual downloads as well. And we're just so grateful for everybody who's there and wanted to invite you. So, hope to see you there, but I also hope you're joining this video, which we'll get back to right now. We are coming in on the home stretch. So I did finish this one all the way off camera because I wanted you to see what this pucker toe looks like before I show you how to do it. I have sewn up the whole back, so we did our baseball stitch down and then chevron stitch around the little heel tab, and you can see how that seals up the heel quite nicely there. Okay? And then the last thing is just sew this vamp in and pull up the puckers. Now we do have to gather the puckers because you can see how much of a difference there is in this arc versus the arc on the vamp. Okay, so all of that has to be accounted for. Now I'm going to set this one aside and just look at layout. The first part of the layout happens when you cut out your pattern to begin with. So if you remember, I folded the tracing in half, and then I marked that halfway point on both sides here. Now, if you forget to do that, it's not a big deal. You still have your pattern. You can still find what half of it is, right? And if not, even if not, you could retrace your foot and find what half of it is. So, not a big deal. But we want to have, there's a little bit of pencil line showing there still. That'll rub off. I'm not worried about that. But we want the edge of the vamp to come right at that halfway mark. So make sure these are lined up properly. And we're just going to go to one side. And I like to do this with these little stationary clips. Okay. You could also do this just by piercing one hole and sewing it together. That would totally work. But these are super handy. Okay, so that will start to pull it into shape. And you can see, right, this heel area is going to immediately get congested as soon as we pull this up. So that's why we stitched that first. Well, we could get to it easier. And all of this stitching is up top, so it won't ever get congested. Okay. Now, we want to pull middles together so that we have about the same amount of swell on both sides. Okay. And as soon as we have that, I'm going to put another clip on it, but I'm going to put this clip a little bit off center so I can get right to the middle. This will hold it in place, but these are not exactly where the seam's going to go. So it's fine for it to be a little bit out of shape. And if it finishes a little out of shape, just wrap it in a wet paper towel for a couple hours or sprinkle a little bit of water in it so it's moist but not wet. And then you can just pull it and pinch it and mold it and set it aside to dry, and it will be in shape. Right? It's very easy to mold this stuff. So these clips are going to kind of hold it close. And I want to come back. You can see we're going to take up all of our gathers and then have about 2 inches left. So I'm going to put another set of clips about 2 inches back. Okay. There's a little bit more over here than over there, but that's okay because we moved this clip over there. Let me double check it. There to there is right. Okay. That clip's going to come off very quickly. Now, I'm going to get my awl, and I'm going to make sure that this is perfectly lined up. And I'm going to come down just far enough that I can puncture both ends without ripping out. So I want to keep this seam as close to the edge as possible. Pierce through. Untangle my bit of thonging. And now this thonging should be about 5 times the length of the seam. And we're going to go through. Now, as always, when you're pulling this kind of thonging through, pull it in little 1-inch pulls. If you just take it at the end and refund it all the way out, you're going to tear it. And I want to get this as centered as possible. So I'm going to take a minute, get it all right. Yep, that's pretty good. Okay. So, there's our first anchor point. Now, what I'm going to do, and I'll show you 2 ways to do this, is I'm going to come and I'm going to deliberately fold a gather. You can do a lot of little ones or a smaller number of bigger ones. That's just an aesthetic choice on your part. Now, while holding this with my left hand, I'm going to pierce another hole through both layers with my right hand. And then pass this thonging through. Make sure it's laying flat. Okay. So you can see there's our first gather. That's one way to do it. Now I can take this clip off. The other way to do this is to pierce the hole through one layer only. Hold it level. Make a pencil mark through that hole. You can see right there's my pencil mark. Is that showing up, beloved? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I can just step over however much I want to gather it by, about 1/4 inch or so for the size I'm doing here. Now I can pierce that hole. And then pass it through to open that up a little bit. First layer, pass it through the second layer, Okay. And now I can pull this over. Pull it through both sides, and it will bind down that gather. Okay? Now, we're just going to do a simple running stitch all the way around, and I'm going to take in all of these gathers. I like to do a stitch to the right, a stitch to the left, a stitch to the right, a stitch to the left to keep it even. Okay? If you go all the way to one side and get to this clip, and then go all the way to the other side, it's a little harder to have everything nice and perfectly even on both sides. But if I do a stitch one, stitch the other, stitch one, stitch the other, if it's going to develop a problem, I'll be able to see that as it's developing and fix it in real time. Okay, so it's easier to keep it straight. So I'm going to do that, go around, pull this extra material into gathers, and then we'll look at where we are halfway through the process. You can see we've gotten all of that excess material gathered up, and this doesn't have to be perfect, but the neater, the more even you can get these little gathers, the neater it will look overall. Now, to a certain extent, how even you can get them will be dictated by thick and thin spots in the leather. So you can do a lot more with a thinner spot than with a thicker spot. And if you look at this shoe, over on this side, there was a big, tough, gnarly, thick spot. And it's not nearly as neat and even as, you know, the equivalent side of this shoe. But you can see we have taken up all the excess, and now we just have a straight piece. Okay. If you look at this one, you can see that there is a stitch all the way around, holding every gather down, and on this one, it's every other. Okay, so it won't look quite as neat now as when we finish this, but don't worry about that at this stage. Just keep going with your simple running stitch. It gets easier now because we're just straight edge to straight edge and we don't have to worry about gathering. Okay, so we'll just do another set of stitches till we get to the end on both sides. Then we'll look at it again and we'll talk about turning and completing all of these tie downs on the gathers. Okay, we are all the way around. Before we start to turn and come back, I want to look and make sure that everything is neat and tidy around the top edge. Don't be afraid if you have some little bits that are sticking up to trim things flat. And that's really common because we have one piece at a straight angle and the other is kind of pulled up into it. So sometimes you'll get a little, pokey point curling up and around. So we can just kind of very carefully trim those a little bit flat if we like. You don't have to, but it can kind of neaten things up a little bit. Okay. And I do like to do that, right? It's just that little bit makes it look a whole lot neater and more finished. Now, as we come back and lash all of these down, if you have one that refuses to lay nice and flat, you can come with the scissors and snip through it a little bit. You don't want to go too far down, but if you snip from here down to about the middle of where the lacing comes through, right through there, that little bit, then instead of trying to collapse flat, instead of trying to, collapse your fold flat, the two edges can overlap and collapse flatter easier. I don't think I'm going to need to do that anywhere on this one, but this big fold right there, if you can see this end and that end, they overlap each other. It's not an even fold folded over, right? So that one I did slit just a little bit, and this one I did slit just a little bit. And those were those two spots in this piece of leather that were really tough and just didn't want to fold. So that's totally legitimate. And if I didn't just tell you that I did that, you would never pick that out, right? It's not a flaw. It's a way of dealing with a really coarse, thick spot that's not going to fold the same way that a thin spot does, right? So it's something that I want you to know you can do that, and that is a trick for working with folded leather. So now we want to make sure that we have enough lacing to go all the way around, because we want a little extra to tuck and work with, right, from both sides. And I have more than enough. I'm going to have chunks of this cut off and saved for future projects on both of these. Right? It's better too much than not enough. So to turn, we're going to come and I'm going to make a hole through one layer only at the back of the vamp, because we want to catch that flap and hold it down so it's not wiggling around on us. Get everything organized nice and neat. Okay. And now we're just going to turn and go back through the same holes that we used in the first place. Now, we are going to need to widen each of these holes, but you don't want to just punch straight through, or you're going to end up cutting your thonging. So you want to go in one of the corners and just kind of wiggle and twist until you find the other opening. Yep. And if you look, we're underneath here, okay? And on the other side, we're also underneath it, okay? It will look best if you do this consistently, either always going from and wiggling down across the top, or always going from and wiggling down across the bottom. However, if you miss one, don't lose sleep over it. It will be just fine. Okay? So there's that stitch. Do it again. Again, I'm going in to the bottom corner, and then I'm just kind of wiggling and fishing. And there, I can feel it when it starts to poke through with my other finger. Obviously, I'm not pressing hard enough to go jam right into my finger. So slow and careful. Then we can reuse that hole. So this is just converting our saddle stitch, or sorry, our running stitch into a saddle stitch. I will go all the way around to the midpoint from both sides. I do it this way, starting in the midpoint, working to the edge, and then working back to the midpoint, because you don't ever tie leather in knots. You tuck it back into pre-existing stitches. And this edge, right, this where your ankle goes in here, this is where it's going to work against the stitch more than any other place in the shoe, right? So the middle of the toe is where it's never going to work against the stitch, okay? Yes, you could wear a hole under the ball of your foot, but you're never going to work against the stitch that point and pull the tucks out. But if you were to just tuck it right here and pull it out, eventually you would always be retucking it. Okay, which isn't the end of the world either. But because I start at the toe, work around here, turn, and come back, there's nothing there except a turn to work loose. Okay? So that makes a more durable joint. So I'm going to work this through, and then we'll talk about tucking off here at the tip. We're all the way back around to the toe, and you can see how, nice and organized, everything's clean, everything's even. Okay? There's, bunching at the gathers, but they're supposed to be bunching at the gathers. That's why they're gathers. Right? So, yeah, we have a whole lot of extra thonging. And when this happens, don't throw this out. Right? We're going to cut this off about there. But don't throw this out. This is enough to sew some other project. Right? You'd spend all the time to tan this leather and cut this out, make nice even thonging, and keep that. Right? That's still good material. We're not wasting anything. We're going to cut these off, 1.5 centimeters, 2 centimeters. You want to leave enough that you can handle it But you also don't want a big gob of material wadded up down in the bottom of this. Okay, so cut those off there. There's our extra for something else. Now, I want to trim these ends. This is a little bit fiddly because the shoe's going to get in the way of trimming. So we have a nice taper, and that taper thins most of the way to the back of that piece. Okay, such as that. Do the same with this one. So it's very, very fiddly to try and do in such a way that you can see what I'm doing. It's also fairly thick material. It's making my scissors a little grumpy. There. Okay, so we have a nice point. Now, if you look at the toe here, you can see I'm one stitch from finished. But that stitch exists on the other side. Same here. I'm one stitched from finished on the inside, but that stitch exists on the outside. So what I want to do to make that last stitch and tuck this in is I'm going to enter the bottom of this stitch just like I have been doing. But I'm reaching inside, and I want to feel, and I can do it now. You're going to have to take my word for it because you don't have x-ray vision there, but my finger's underneath here, and when I'm poking this through and wiggle it, I can feel that on my fingertip inside the shoe. Okay? So, instead of going through both layers, okay, I'm going through one layer and then down in between. Instead of going through both layers that way, I'm going down in. Okay. And then we take this end, start it in there, and now I'm just going to take the awl and just poke it down in and feed it through. Okay. I'm going to tighten it by pressure with the awl rather than by pulling from the other side. And there's that final stitch. Now, this would obviously, just going down in like that would obviously work loose if I did that here at the end. That's why we went all the way back to do that in the middle. But there's not going to be any real pressure on that to want to try and pull that up. Now the same thing on this one. I'm going to start, this in view? Is it in view well? I'm going to start here at the base of that stitch, then turn 90 degrees and work it down. So you can see I'm pressing against there. If I flip it over, you can't see anything. Okay? If I reach in with my finger, I can feel my finger is inside, and I can feel that on my fingertip. Okay? Roll it to kind of point it a little bit. Start it down in there. Then tighten it by poking it through with the awl. And there we go, finished seam. So there you go, we have a shoe. Now, this is the simplest possible version of this style of shoe. If you go and you start looking at historic examples and modern powwow regalia, you're going to see flaps added to the side, and you're often going to see beadwork or quill work done on the vamp. Okay? Now, I wanted to talk about those for a minute. We're just doing the simplest possible shoe. Um, because the simplest possible shoe isn't really tied to a particular culture. The medieval pointy-toed, weird-looking court jester shoes are made with exactly the same construction methods and would work from the same pattern as a Southern Appalachian center pucker seam, right? It's a thing that fits the human body, and since human feet come in a variety of sizes but only one shape, pretty much every culture has arrived at some version of shoe. If you are a native person and you want to take this and develop traditional powwow regalia, you could either lay out the side when you make your pattern. You can leave an extra flap here from the midpoint. Let me turn it this way. From the midpoint to the back. You could leave an extra 2 or 3 inches there, however much you wanted, for a flap that folds down. And that's very traditional. That's very common in, Haudenosaunee footwear and, well, really all the way up the Northeast. And that's often also done on, like Southern center seam designs as well. And then, of course, you could bead the vamp before you sew it in. And if we look historically, it was very commonly done that, people would do the beadwork on a piece that's an applique, so that when the shoe wears out, when you wear the sole out, you can just take those off, remake the shoe, but the vamp's not really going to wear out, and the flaps aren't really going to wear out. So you can make the shoe, and then after you've made the shoe, just measure how far back you want the flap to be, cut out a piece, and just stitch it on. You're totally traditional, right? With, yeah, so also often the beadwork would be a little medallion. Okay, and then the medallion would be stitched on top of the vamp for the same reason. Okay, so making the simplest possible shoe, if you're not a native person and you just want a shoe, cool, right? Everybody in the early days of the post-contact era, everybody who wasn't a city dweller was making this kind of shoe, right? Because this is what you could make without complicated cobbler's tools, right? And, everywhere in the world. There's versions of this. Some are made of fabric, some are made of leather, some are woven from various plant materials. But there's something that looks like this in every region of the world, okay? So you can take this basic construction any direction you want, right? But it is, totally within keeping of Native American tradition to make the simple shoe, and then after you've made the simple shoe, make medallions and make flaps and add things extra onto them. Because usually you go, if you were wearing this every day, you're going to go through 2 or 3 pairs a year. Okay, so it makes sense if you're going to decorate something to have it a piece that's easy to remove and put onto the next rendition. Okay, and if you're going out, imagine yourself 600 years ago and you're going out to, the nut orchard where you're going to go pick walnuts and acorns for the winter. You're not going to bring anything fancy. You're just going to have your most basic, simplest, least leather required utilitarian version, okay, for that trip. And you'll leave the decorated pair at home for a ceremony for when you get back. So I wanted to comment on that a little bit, that this is the skeleton of a piece of footwear that then can be elaborated upon and taken many different directions. I would encourage everybody watching this to identify your own cultural heritage and look back into that if you want to decorate your shoe, and make something which tells your family's story. Okay? You can take this skill and apply it to your family's story, because everybody has some traditional indigenous culture from which your family emerged. Okay? Somewhere in the world, there is an indigenous culture to which you belong. Find that and take this in that direction. This is just the skeleton. You can build on it however you want. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that some of these leatherworking projects and these various crafts are helping you in your journey. both to, greater self-sufficiency and of the ability to make things which tell your family story.
And I hope it's fun.
And it's fun. And fun. So, I hope that you'll join us next time here at Old Ways Rising Farm, and have a blessed day.